Today we're going to have a look at an absolute classic. The Metal Gear franchise dates back to the 80s, where it popularized the stealth genre. But it wasn't until the 90s that the series finally had its big breakthrough in the West. It was about 20 years ago when I got my hands on my first Metal Gear game, which is still among my favorites even to this day. But it's also one that time has sadly forgotten. Metal Gear Solid. On the Game Boy Color. Alright, before we delve into the game, let's have a quick look at the Metal Gear history. Produced, directed, written and designed by Hideo Kojima, it was in 1987 when Metal Gear was developed and released by Konami on the MSX2, the first entry of the Metal Gear series. Unlike many games at the time, it was more about stealth and avoiding combat, rather than shooting your way through a level. Being spotted by the enemy would cause all the enemy guards on screen to attack the player, or even call for backup, which might have fatal consequences. Kojima, who grew up watching a ton of movies as a kid, is known nowadays to be making a lot of references to cinema in his games, and even back in the 80s he was already using the video game medium as a way of telling more complex stories. However, in this game, the narrative was still rather minimalistic, but references are definitely there. The game's cover is already saying a lot. Yep, that's totally Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese in the first Terminator movie. Anyway, Solid Snake, agent of the Special Forces Unit Foxhound, is sent to the fortified mercenary state Outer Heaven, located in Central Africa. His mission? To rescue Grey Fox, a fellow Foxhound agent, and destroy Metal Gear, a bipedal tank that can launch nuclear missiles from anywhere in the world. The Foxhound commander, known as Big Boss, would support him via radio. By the end of the game, after Snake rescued Grey Fox and several other hostages, took out Outer Heaven's elite mercenaries, and destroyed Metal Gear, it is revealed that the leader and founder of Outer Heaven is none other than Snake's commanding officer, Big Boss himself. With Metal Gear in pieces, he realizes that his hopes and dreams of Outer Heaven becoming a superpower that could threaten Western civilization are now out of reach. Big Boss activates the fortress's self-destruct sequence, and it comes to a showdown between the two soldiers. Snake is able to defeat his former mentor, and escapes the fortress before it blows up. Let me just quickly stress that I'm retelling the story how it was told back then, and ignore every revelation from Metal Gear Solid 4 and 5 and so on. The sequel, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, was released 3 years later, and built on the predecessor's foundation in almost every way. The story was much more engaging, and a lot more emphasis was put on dialogue. The gameplay mechanics were tweaked, and enemies were now reacting to noises caused by the player, and you could crawl as well. It also introduced the radar system, which displayed enemy movement and allowed a more tactical approach. Getting caught would now result in an alert phase, which causes enemy reinforcements to come after the player until the timer runs out. There were 2 Metal Gear games released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, both without any involvement of Hideo Kojima himself. The first one was a port of the original Metal Gear on MSX2, but it had some baffling differences to the original. For example, a sequence at the beginning of the game was added, where Snake would have to fight his way through a jungle in order to reach Outer Heaven. When you die, you keep your items, but you get sent back to the jungle every time that happens, which is extremely annoying. Many of the new locations are designed in a way that you get spotted immediately by enemies when you enter the area, which is weird considering this is supposed to be a stealth game. The original Metal Gear had a few mandatory combat sections, but those would only happen once in a while, and not every time you enter a specific screen. Also, the boss fight against the titular Metal Gear is completely absent. Instead, you get to fight a computer. Exciting! In my opinion, the game's quality doesn't even come close to the original, as it lacks polish and has some extremely frustrating and nonsensical level design. Having played both versions recently, I describe my experience as follows. The original feels like an old-school stealth adventure with bare-bones mechanics, while this one feels more like having the flu. Nonetheless, it received critical acclaim back then and is featured on many lists of best games on the platform. The second game on NES was a sequel titled Snake's Revenge, and it was not well received at all. This game was made without Kojima's consent, and I don't really feel like going into detail about that one today. I mean, just look at Snake. I don't think this is what Kojima had in mind when he originally came up with the character. Compare him to the guy we've seen in Metal Gear on the MSX, or even to the Kyle Reese version. They look nothing alike. And it's probably just the weird art style, but he looks like he's made of metal. And why is he so beefy? Maybe he went to the same gym as Chris Redfield or something, I don't know. Anyway, there is one positive thing to take away from Snake's Revenge, and that is that it inspired Kojima to make his own sequel, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, in the first place. So it ain't all bad. 1998 marked the year when the franchise hit the third dimension and had its biggest success, with the release of Metal Gear Solid on the Sony PlayStation. This time, Kojima went all out. Film-like cutscenes, awesome set pieces, amazing boss fights, especially the one versus Psycho Mantis was mind-blowing at the time. It's also the first time Metal Gear features art by the great Yoji Shinkawa, whose amazing designs, illustrations and beautiful art would enrich every Metal Gear to come. Except for the latest one. It also marked David Hayter's first performance as Solid Snake, whose way of saying Metal Gear would change the world.
Metal Gear. It can't be.
He'd reprised the role of Snake and his father Big Boss in every entry of the franchise up until Metal Gear Solid 5, where he would be replaced by Kiefer Sutherland. Well, almost every entry, obviously excluding the ones that don't have voice acting, sadly including the game we are going to discuss today. After Metal Gear Solid became a smash hit on the PlayStation in 1998, Konami Europe requested a Game Boy Color version of the game. Released in the year 2000 under the title of Metal Gear Ghost Babel in Japan, this would be the first time since the NES that a Metal Gear would be released on a Nintendo platform. Unlike previous titles, Kojima was only acting as producer this time around. The job of director was given to Shinta Nojiri, who would later direct the Metal Gear Acid games on the Sony PSP. The head writer was Tomokazu Fukushima, who co-wrote Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation and who'd later work on more main titles of the Metal Gear franchise as well. Ikuya Nakamura did the artwork and character design, with Yoji Shinkawa creating the beautiful promotional illustrations based on those designs, and Shinkawa also provided the design of this game's Metal Gear, which was a scrap design of Metal Gear Rex on the PS1. Ghost Babel was only the title of the Japanese version. The rest of the world would know the game as Metal Gear Solid, just like on PS1. Probably for brand recognition. To avoid confusion with the title on PS1, I'm going to be referring to this game as Ghost Babel from now on. When it comes to the story, Ghost Babel is considered non-canon, as it doesn't really fit within the chronology. It's basically set in an alternate timeline that ignores the events after the first Metal Gear. In this timeline, Snake destroyed Metal Gear in Outer Heaven, and killed the Foxhound commander and Outer Heaven's leader, Big Boss, whom Snake later learned was his father. Ghost Babel is set 7 years after these events, when Snake's old friend Colonel Roy Campbell, now retired Foxhound commander, visits Snake in his cottage in Alaska, where Snake went to live out the rest of his days away from society. Campbell informs Snake that an American plane that was on a classified mission in South America had been hijacked by a band of mercenaries. That plane was carrying nuclear weapons, and of course, a new Metal Gear. The man behind that act of terrorism is Augustin Agwabon. Am I pronouncing this correctly? Well, let's look it up. Here we go. Oh, okay. Not a real name. Proceed. Also known as the General. He's the leader of an armed separatist group that is fighting a civil war in Gindra, a small state in Central Africa. This group, the Gindra Liberation Front, short GLF, operates from a fortress in the mountains referred to as Gallowade, that appears to be impregnable, which is where Snake comes into play. The US government wants Snake to infiltrate the fortress, destroy Metal Gear, and rescue the scientists that were on board the plane as well. Snake is reluctant to accept that mission. However, when Campbell tells him that the fortress Gallowade was formerly known as Outer Heaven, he changes his mind. And this is where the game starts. Snake does the classical Halo jump to enter enemy territory, and now he has to sneak, hide and fight his way through 13 missions of varying lengths, collect keycards, defeat bosses, make plenty of phone calls, and uncover conspiracies. Like in both Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear 2 before it, you have a radar that shows you the location and movement of guards. If they discover you, or you run into the line of sight of a surveillance camera, The alarm will be raised and the guards will chase you and call for reinforcements. There are two modes when that happens. The first one is the alert mode, when the enemy knows exactly where you are and the timer will only go down when you're out of sight, and being seen will reset the timer instantly. The second one is the evasion mode, where the guards don't know where you are, but they are actively searching for you and will continue to do so until the timer reaches 0. If they see you, it's back to the alert phase. Neither of these modes will allow you to use the radar, which makes outmaneuvering the guards 10 times more difficult. Guards also react to noises. You can use this to your advantage by knocking against a wall, which will cause nearby soldiers to investigate, and allow you to pass through undetected. But this can get you into trouble as well. For example, when you walk onto something that creates sound, like a puddle of water or grated flooring. Or when you knock out or kill a guard, and another one hears them hitting the floor. If you use guns or explosives when enemies are nearby, the alarm is instantly triggered. Which leads us to the weapons. Snake has a handful of weapons at his disposal. A handgun, which can be equipped with a silencer, an assault rifle, grenades, landmines, C4 explosives that you can activate remotely, and the Nikita missile launcher, known from the first Metal Gear, which shoots remote-controlled missiles. Those are a ton of fun. There are also chaff grenades that you can use to temporarily disable surveillance cameras, and stun grenades, which will incapacitate enemies for a short amount of time, useful when you're on the run. And if you don't have any weapons available, you can always use your fists to knock out enemies. And the famous cardboard box, introduced in the very first Metal Gear, is back too, that allows you to hide in plain sight as long as you stay still and guards don't walk into you. The campaign comes with 4 difficulty levels that you can choose from. On Easy, the standard guards can be killed by punching them 3 times or shooting them once. On Normal, more guards are around and punching them 3 times will knock them out, while an additional punch, once they regain consciousness, will kill them, and they take 2 shots to take down. Additionally, bosses will have a bigger variety of attacks when you fight them. On Hard and Very Hard, it's impossible to kill guards with your bare hands. There are even more enemies and surveillance cameras around. They react smarter, take more damage to be killed, and they also hurt you a lot more. And the limit of how many chaff and stun grenades, ammunition and rations you can carry is much more restrictive. If you're a pacifist and you want to kill as few people as possible, I recommend going for normal or higher difficulty, since enemy guards on Easy pretty much die if you just look at them funny. There is a huge amount of content overall. Apart from the main campaign, there's also a versus mode and the VR training mode, which is almost an entire game in itself. You can also replay previously completed missions, and once you finish the campaign, you unlock the special mode where the story missions come with a variety of objectives and conditions that differ from the main game. Sadly, I never got to play the versus mode, since to this day, I believe I've never met anyone who owned or even played this game. From what I've read in reviews, it's supposed to be quite fun. All I have are the pictures in the description and the manual. Sad days. VR training features 3 modes: sneaking, weapon, and advanced. In sneaking, you have to reach the goal without raising the alarm. Once you've finished every sneaking level, you unlock the 5 to 7 mode, which lets you replay the levels, but this time you have a silenced gun, and taking out every guard without being detected is required for the exit to appear. In weapon mode, you get a set of 5 levels for each weapon type, and you have to destroy the targets with the weapons provided. Once you've finished every practice level of the sneaking and weapon modes, you unlock the advanced mode, which is a little bit like weapon mode, however this time, your goal is to use the weapons to fight guards, and you can only proceed once all guards are eliminated. Most of the missions in either mode don't appear to be particularly challenging at first, with a few exceptions. But once you realize that there is a time attack mode for every stage, that's when the difficulty comes in. Having only limited time and ammunition available can make it quite challenging. Like when you have just a couple of seconds to destroy a moving target using a landmine, or having to guide a Nikita missile through a maze to kill a guard. After getting 100% completion in VR training, you unlock the sound mode, which allows you to listen to the in-game soundtrack and to the individual sound effects. So there is even a reward for doing so. Although there is quite a bit to do in VR training, it's not quite as big as marketing and review sites have you believe. Advertised as containing 180 levels, the actual number is only half of that, since they count the stages double due to them coming in practice and time attack variants, and the stages are all pretty short too. Still, since they just feature the gameplay without the story, and the missions are bite-sized, they allow for a lot of replayability, as you can always try to beat your record. And it also shows that the core gameplay is quite good. Personally, I'm not a fan of landmines though. The controls are smooth and easy, especially when compared to the other 2D Metal Gear games, where you couldn't even walk diagonally. A is for punching, B is for using the currently selected weapon, and start is for switching between crawling and standing position, which is a bit unusual, given that most games use start to open the menus or something, but it makes sense in context. The select button opens the menu screen. From here you can press up and down on the D-pad to select the item you want to have equipped, and left and right to select the weapon. Pressing start here will open the codec, which allows you to call your teammates. When it comes to the graphics, they might not be the most colorful on the system. However, I have to say that I'm quite impressed by how detailed and realistic the animations are. Guards sneeze, they stretch, they look around, and they fall over when shot, or get knocked back when hit by an explosion. Snake's got a lot of great animations, especially the one where he's running looks amazing. Just look at his bandana! My favorite is the little jump he does whenever you finish the final mission of a VR training set. He looks so happy! I could watch that for hours. The cutscenes look great. They might just be slightly animated images for the most part, but I love them. And they really add a lot to the game's storytelling. In terms of music, the game uses a lot of jingles and tracks known from other titles in the series, like when the mission starts, or the game over sound. The tunes heard in VR training also stem from Metal Gear 1 and 2. Most of the original tracks made for this game are also amazing. The song during the credits is among my favorites, and the title screen. That theme that's playing in combination with that beautiful Yoji Shinkawa design is just perfect, and absolutely sets the stage for the rest of the game. The sound effects are very Konami. Listen to those explosions. One effect that always bothered me was the one used when stepping on grated flooring. That weird high beeping sound really doesn't sound appropriate for my taste. A bit more variance to the sound effects would have been nice too. There are also these individual sound effects that play when people are talking. I assume they are supposed to imitate the individual voices, but I was never quite sure what to think of those. Oh, and after 21 years, I still get startled whenever I hear that sound. Unlike the other games in the series, Ghost Babel's structure is level-based, rather than having one large base where you unlock new areas by backtracking and opening previously locked doors and so on. I recommend exploring the levels as much as possible, as you can find useful items and weapons in them. And once you completed a level, it is impossible to go back to that area. That doesn't mean though that the items you have failed to collect become inaccessible completely. Weapons you missed can usually still be found in later stages, but in the unlikely scenario that you haven't picked up a gun by the time you get to the second boss, you are up for a tough fight, since they can't be damaged using your fists, and the only weapons you will have automatically acquired by that point are grenades and C4, and if you're out of ammo for those, then you might as well let them kill you, as there is just no way to beat them. But once you hit continue, there is actually a location close enough to your spawning point where you can find a handgun. So running into a softlock is not really possible from what I've seen. The overall level architecture can be a bit confusing at times, and if you don't have a good sense of direction, you are probably gonna get lost every now and then. The levels themselves offer a lot of variance. Some introduce new hazards, while others have some sort of gimmick that is used throughout the stage. No mission feels the same, and revisiting them is always a joy. For the most part, at least. I'm gonna talk about that stage a little later. I also recommend calling your teammates every now and then, since there are plenty of optional hidden conversations in the game that differ from the generic dialogue. When you beat the game, at least in the European and Japanese version, you will see a codec frequency displayed in the credits, 14007. Calling that frequency in a new game will give you a crazy radio drama series about a character named Idea Spy 2.5, who's going after an evil corporation that sells useless junk to people. You get one episode per mission, so don't forget to call it at the start of each chapter when you're replaying the game. And in case you're fluent in Japanese, Idea Spy 2.5 was actually adapted into a real radio drama series, where 2.5 is voiced by none other than Hideo Kojima himself. Replaying the levels in special mode offers new challenges. A strange character who's referring to themselves as number 4 gives you new tasks per mission, such as beating the level in less than 45 seconds, managing to reach the exit while being chased by guards from start to finish, completing the mission without taking any damage, or just finishing the stage while unusual obstacles are literally thrown at you. They are a great way to test your skill, and they also reward you with more background information on the story. When it comes to story and dialogue, the game touches a few topics that you wouldn't exactly expect in a Game Boy game, especially when you consider that in Japan the Game Boy Color was mostly marketed towards elementary school children. Kojima, however, wanted this entry to still feel like a proper Metal Gear game, despite the hardware limitations, and with themes you would find in the rest of the series. As a result, we have a plot and conversations that venture into very dark territory at times. Here are a few examples of what kinds of things you'll see in this game for a handheld directed at children. Patricide, fratricide, genocide, suicide, depression, self-immolation, serial killings involving dismemberment, being confronted with your own actions as a player, and of course, the series staples, war and nuclear threat. And the story is quite alright. I mean, it's not as deep as the 3D entries of the series, and video game stories have evolved a lot since the game's release, but for what it is, it's engaging. And it has enough twists and turns and dramatic moments you would expect from a Metal Gear game, enough stuff to keep you entertained. The characters also have facets to them, and show that they are not as two-dimensional as you'd expect from a game from that period. Even the enemy bosses get a chance to show that they have motivation that drives them, and become sort of sympathetic. It also feels more grounded when compared to the main games of the franchise, as grounded as a story involving a giant bipedal robot can be. There are no supernatural foes, no super sci-fi elements. The most outlandish thing apart from Metal Gear itself is one of the bosses who has a mutation that allows him to see in the dark. That's it. One aspect about the narrative that to this day I'm not sure if it's either bad or brilliant is that two of the main players are never actually seen during the plot, and are only talked about occasionally. And a lot of details about these two characters are only revealed when completing the special missions after you already finished the campaign. This was actually the first game I've ever played that had that much dialogue, story, and character development, and so I'll always have a bit of a soft spot for it. But the story, and also the individual chapters, are something I'm going to delve more into in the next part of this retrospective. Furthermore, since no game is perfect, I'm also going to discuss the game's flaws, and there are a few. Until then, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like. And if you want to see the next one, why don't you subscribe to my channel? Thanks, and I hope you have a lovely day.